This lecture focuses on the development of political parties in America from 1783 to 1849. Political parties today. In present-day America, there are two main political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats focus on more social programs, more liberal social policies, greater cooperation with other nations, and a focus on personal liberties. The Republicans focus on lower taxes, less social programs, more conservative social policies, and less cooperation with other nations. How did the party system develop? Originally, the leaders had not intended to establish political parties. That was the hope of George Washington. However, over time, divisions developed between leaders and those within government. Government representatives and various officials joined sides and the party system began. The beginning. George Washington was the first president of the United States, but belonged to no political party. He established a cabinet. A cabinet is a group of advisors who are responsible to run different areas of government. For example, the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense. Two key advisors to Washington were Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. These two individuals had very different ideas on the role of the federal government. Hamilton versus Jefferson. Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson had been named to Washington's cabinet. They both had different views on the role of government. Hamilton favored a more centralized federal government, while Jefferson defended state power. As a result, both battled to have their way of thinking influence Washington's decisions. Both also established a group of supporters. Washington frequently sided with Hamilton. Eventually, Jefferson resigned in opposition. The formation of parties, the Republicans. After resigning, Jefferson allied himself with James Madison, a member of Congress, to form an opposition to Washington. The Union represented the Democratic-Republican interest. They claimed to stand for freedom and self-government. Formation of unofficial parties, the Federalists. Hamilton and his supporters responded by calling themselves the Federalists. They chose that name because they supported the Constitution and granting the federal government more significant power. The election of 1796. Washington resigned after 2 terms in office, and the Federalists chose John Adams to run for president. The Democratic Republicans chose Thomas Jefferson as their leader. This was the first election between the two parties. John Adams won the election to become the second American president. Partisan Legislation of 1798. The Federalists enacted legislation, laws, to limit support for the Republicans and limit freedom of speech, especially criticizing the government. Instead of weakening the Republicans, this legislation increased support for them. Partisan Politics. By 1800, both the Republicans and the Federalists soon developed very organized networks across the country. However, elections soon became dirty campaigns, with each side accusing the other of being anti-democratic, atheists, and drunkards. The disappearance of the Federalist Party. Following the end of the War of 1812, the Federalist Party disappeared. Their disappearance was the result of their opposition to the War of 1812 and the popularity of James Monroe and the era of good feelings. There was a change in the names of the main parties leading up to the election of 1828. The election of 1828 saw John Quincy Adams, son of John Adams, against Andrew Jackson. Adams' supporters, mainly from the Northeast, became known as the National Republicans, or the Whigs. Jackson's supporters, mainly farmers and skilled workers, became known as the Democratic Republicans, the Democrats. A true mudslinging campaign. The National Republicans portrayed Jackson as someone who misspelled every 4th word, an adulterer and a butcher who murdered people. However, Jackson would go on to win the presidency, the first president to come from beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Andrew Jackson would serve as president from 1829 to 1837. Some of his contributions include: he was a famous American military leader from the War of 1812 and the wars between the American Army and the natives. He was the first president from west of the Appalachian Mountains. He represented the common person, coming from virtually nothing. He was also the first person to serve as U.S. Representative, Senator, and President, now a common road to the presidency. The spoils system. Andrew Jackson was also the first president to make appointments based on party loyalty. Each election, there would be a rotation in office based on which party won the election. Those who had supported the elected president would receive important positions within government. A common phrase to describe the spoils system was "to the winner goes the spoils." The election of 1840. William Henry Harrison, a member of the National Republican Party, was elected as president. However, he died shortly into his first term and was succeeded by John Tyler, his vice president. Tyler had a dispute with his cabinet, his advisors, and they resigned, making Tyler a president without a party. James Polk. Polk was a Democrat and became president in 1844. He would serve one term in office and help expand the territory of the nation through the acquisition of Texas and other territories from the Mexican-American War. The election of 1848. During this election, the main parties avoided the major issue of slavery. Instead, they focused on territorial expansion. The Free Soil Party. Anti-slavery Democrats in the North felt slavery should be the major issue of the election. They joined with the Liberty Party to form the Free Soil Party. They received a small percentage of the popular vote. Zachary Tyler, a National Republican Whig, would go on to become the president. The impact of political parties. Number 1, provided structure and organization for the nation. Number 2, provided different views on important issues. Number 3, improved democracy by providing choice for the voters. And number 4, there was more corruption and scandals as a result of the spoils system.